Did you have any other questions about the paper, or is it
I'm
pretty?
just taking my time,
No,
procrastinating.
it's the right way to do it, man.
Yeah. Yeah, surprisingly, like a lot more of like media coverage over, books and magazines, which I figured.
Yeah.
I'm a TikTok kind of gal. Oh, it makes me so gross. I just like that because I was always like, oh, I'm not going to download it. I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
And then I downloaded it, and here I am with like 32 hours.
Yeah. It's
of
addictive.
TikTok.
It's absolutely addictive.
Yeah.
I know so many people who, the same thing. They were, like, oh, I would never. And then as soon as they get into it, it's their fixture.
Because you could just scroll on it.
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh, and it's the algorithm is so much more random.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, there's definitely some problems with their algorithm, but for the most part, they've done a really good job figuring out like personal trends and likes and dislikes. Like, they catch a lot of flack for a lot of different reasons, but they got that part worked out.
Yeah.
I think Netflix and TikTok should have a conversation about like how do you determine
absolutely.
what people's interests are, because Netflix is terrible at that.
Okay.
Like that's always been one of the biggest problems they face is figuring out their recommended movies or recommended shows for people.
My dad recommended a show for me, and it was the week I was like doing the media log, and it's just like it was so bad.
Oh really?
It was so terrible.
What was it?
It's that it wasn't awful, but it was the wretched thing.
Oh yeah, I couldn't even make it through the first episode.
I managed the whole season,
Yeah.
and it was just like, and I binged the whole season. So have fun reading about that. Yeah, because it was so like end to every character that you fall in love with, and it's like, what is the point?
It was so campy. Like I said, I couldn't even get through the first episode because I'm like, just stop it. Like they went overboard with how cheesy and like deliberately cheesy and overplayed, and it's like stop. Like, and the fact that it's based off of a central character from one of the best movies of all time, and it's like you're ruining this. Stop it. Like, just knock it off. You don't have to be. And I love Sarah Paulson. I usually love everything that she does, but this was just terrible. It was painful. I'm really disappointed that the Boys on Amazon is over. Like their second season just got done last week, so now I have nothing to look forward to on Fridays. Damn it. That's another one of those. You guys don't know how lucky you have it. Binging wasn't an option back. That's what I do with Breaking Bad. I didn't watch Breaking Bad until the last season. So I watched all 5 of the first seasons back to back. Like I binged it so I could watch the last season. And it's like, okay, cool. I feel like you always want more, but it's not as bad when you can watch 5 seasons worth. Oh, goodness gracious. Well, theoretically, either people will show up or they'll be viewing the recording of this. So we'll go through it and
maybe we'll actually have a conversation.
right? Well, that was the biggest. That's why I was so excited about like actually being in person today. Because this is stuff that people, yeah.
I'm mad at you.
Not people.
I'm mad at you.
You want to know?
Why didn't you say Zoom was, whether class or not was on Zoom?
You want to tell them, Lindsay?
Well, if you don't get an email, it's in class.
I came here like at 9:58 or so and no one was here.
We've been in here.
Whatever.
Oh.
I'll be back.
Okay. Why am I the bad guy? I'm always the bad guy.
I don't know.
See what it is, kids these days. But like I said, I was really excited about having because this stuff is like really good for that kind of exchange. And
Yeah, I wish there was like a way to unmute myself with like the Zoom, because like I'm always making noises, like approval noises while you're talking, and it's just like yes, argue. Yes.
Well, it's so awkward teaching in that mode because you're like,
understand.
it's just like I'm not going to make anybody turn on their cameras because that's not fair, right? mean you shouldn't be expected to. But at the same time, like, I mean, I'm just teaching with blank screen, so I have no idea what, where people are at. I have no idea. I can't get any of that nonverbal feedback, and it's awkward. It's so awkward.
I wouldn't put myself in those shoes.
I don't love it.
Yeah.
I really don't love it. It's almost everyone I talk to lately. They're like, oh, how's it going? And like, it's so weird. It's just, I thought I was finally like getting good at teaching after 15 years, and now I don't know what the hell I'm doing. It's just, everything's confusing and scary and different. Like most fat white men, I'm not a fan of change. Not good at adapting.
I'm not a skinny woman either, so.
That's one of my favorite jokes from Family Guy. It was like in the first season, Peter Griffin comes riding in on an elephant. He goes, "Look, Lois, it's the two symbols of the Republican Party: an elephant and a fat white man afraid of change."
Where's the lie, though?
Yeah, right. Was it Wayne? Maybe it was Simpsons. It was Family Guy or Simpsons. It was one of the two. Just that line. I'll never forget.
People should not show up to class more often. This is good.
It was great. You get a humanizing experience. Well, and in regular semesters, every class is like this. Like I get we build a rapport and we have conversations and like legit, like these masks create a serious interference in people's, because it's one thing I said to a colleague of mine, is I said, this has made me realize just how much of my communication style is nonverbal.
Yeah.
Right, because like people can't see my face and they can't see the expressions I'm using to try and convey ideas.
Yeah, I get that at the hotel all the time because like I'll be smirking at people and then Linda thinks I'm just staring at her.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, I want to help you.
I swear I'm not being weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's everything is sucks.
Okay, what was that?
That was Metallica.
Yeah.
I saw them in concert when they were promoting that album. They came to the Metro Center. I was like 11. And my brother took me to a Metallica concert when I was 11. Because he's done a lot of drugs. So he thought it was a good idea.
I'm not.
Okay, Adam said he was coming back. That or not, he said he was coming back. After this, I get to go film a bunch of stuff on campus. We're making a virtual campus tour video. And so I get to go film little tidbits. Get to go film in the theater. Oh, I'm a lot of time in building F today. Theater, gallery, music department, all that fun stuff. And then I get to go to the nursing lab, because I'm a big fan of the nurses.
I'm done.
Yay! Where did you go? That was a while.
I was in one of the Zoom labs.
Okay. Yeah, I told Lindsay at the beginning, I was like, I thought about sending out an email just to say like, hey, we're gonna meet face to face, but then I didn't, and I was worried this was gonna happen. Like, I wonder how many people are like sitting in a Zoom room right now, like.
Navia was.
Navia was?
Yeah, she was in the last one.
Damn. Well, because I know that like Brady said he wasn't gonna make it, and Michael said he wasn't gonna make it, so I knew those two. But anyway, all right. Well, we're gonna talk about the principles of journalism today, and again, like the disclaimer I gave you guys on Wednesday, I have opinions. I have thoughts on this stuff, and I make no apologies for it. It would be one thing if my opinions were based on speculation, but my opinions are based in practice. They're based in application, based in history. So I feel like my opinions have merit, and plus I'm a teacher. I can do whatever I want, so I want to say it. You can deal with it. So what are the principles of journalism, and how are they actually applied, and how should they be applied? Well, the first principle of journalism is the one that most people kind of automatically assume, is the idea of objectivity, right? I'm curious, as run-of-the-mill folk, as common people, as salt of the earth, what do you think objectivity in journalism means? When I say a journalist should aim for objectivity, what do you think that means? What should they be aiming for?
Sticking close to the story, not straying too far off.
Okay, staying close to the story. Yeah, that. Well, isn't that one of the biggest gripes you hear people say about news is that it's biased, right? So bias is kind of the opposite of objectivity, right? Objectivity is the idea that I'm removing all opinion. I'm removing opinion from my reporting, and I'm giving you just the facts, right? It's the old Dragnet line: the facts and nothing but the facts. Just the facts, man. Journalists are supposed to remove any personal biases, any personal feelings, any personal opinions they might have about anything they're writing about. They're supposed to remove themselves from their writing. Is essentially what objectivity is. Can anyone do that?
No.
No, absolutely not, right? The goal is not be completely objective. The goal is aim for objectivity, right? The closer you get to removing yourself, the better. But realizing that nobody's ever going to be 100% objective. That is an absolutely critical component of the goals of journalism, because without that, why bother with journalism at all, right? If we're not even pretending to be objective, why bother at all? One of the things I love about a class like this is that current events is always relevant to what we're doing. There's always new shit happening in the world that affects this stuff. Literally a week and a half ago, Fox News was in court arguing that Tucker Carlson, who is one of their highest rated show hosts, is so obviously not a journalist that it would be crazy for anyone to take him seriously. They were arguing this in defense of a libel suit, right? Saying that oh well, it wasn't really defamation, it wasn't really libel because nobody would take him seriously. Come on, everybody knows he's just an idiot. What? Isn't the whole basis of his programming that he's telling you the truth because nobody else will? But in a court of law, they're arguing no one would believe that? There are literally millions of people who believe that. Alex Jones, the conspiracy theorist, right, who runs InfoWars, right? He pops his ugly ass head up every once in a while to get notoriety. Most recently, his worst thing that he does terrible things every day. The worst thing he's done recently is, you guys remember the Newtown shooting, the elementary school that was shut up in Connecticut? He claimed it was fake. He claimed it was a false flag operation. He said that nobody actually died there, that the parents were crisis actors, that this was all a fake media event to try and get people's guns.
Geez, those are some fake bullets right there.
Yeah. That's what he argued, right? He said repeatedly on his show that these people aren't victims, they're fake, they're actors. That resulted in his fans, his supporters, harassing, intimidating, and threatening these families. So they sued him and said, hey, dick, you can't do this. You're creating, you're turning people into violent mobs against us, right? Causing undue pain. In court, when push comes to shove, Alex Jones had to admit, well, he doesn't really think that. He doesn't really believe that. When Alex Jones was getting divorced and he was going through a custody hearing with his now ex-wife, his defense was, because his wife was saying, you can't give custody to him. Look at him. Look at all of these videos of him screaming into a camera about frogs being turned gay as part of a communist agenda, right? Like, how in the hell would you give this man custody of children? And his defense in court was, he's just playing a character. That's not real. He doesn't really believe that. At the same time, he's going on air telling people he is real, but in court he's arguing, well, obviously I'm faking it. This is why objectivity is so important, right? So that we can at least believe that some of the news media isn't just faking it for ratings, which Tucker Carlson and Alex Jones have both admitted under threat of perjury, under threat of prison time. They have admitted they're full of shit. They are not concerned with telling the truth. They are not concerned with objectivity. They are only concerned with entertainment. That's literally their defense.
Is there like a difference between a talk show and like a news show?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. The problem is, are they presented as such? Right? No one's going to believe Jerry Springer is news. Right? No reasonable person, that's the legal phrasing, reasonable person. No reasonable person is going to watch Jerry Springer and believe, oh, this is hard-hitting, cutting-edge news. But would a reasonable person watch Tucker Carlson and believe that that's cutting-edge, hard-hitting news? Why? Because they present it as such. Jerry Springer does not present his show to be confused with news. Tucker Carlson's entire shtick is designed to come across as news. What channel is he on? Not Fox Entertainment. He's not on Fox, opinion. He's on Fox News. And he starts and ends every show by explaining how his position is the news. He's the opposite of objective. Right? The opposite of objective. And again, fair being fair. Rachel Maddow, not objective. Not objective. Chris Hayes, Brian Lynch, not objective. They're opinion journalists. But they don't claim to not be opinion journalists. Alex Jones claims he's not an opinion journalist. Tucker Carlson claims he's not an opinion journalist. And that's where the problem lies. There's absolutely nothing wrong with being batshit crazy like Alex Jones. It's telling people that you're actually the only one with real information while being batshit crazy. That's dangerous.
So why not just become like an opinion journalist? Why not just like switch to that instead of just being a news journalist?
Credibility, right? Because if it's known to be an opinion journalist, right, and then you cite Tucker Carlson, then people are going to say, well, yeah, that's just his opinion. What the fuck does he know? But so long as you can carry that credibility, that air of like, oh, well, I'm a journalist. Right? If I cited the National Enquirer, right? If I said to you like, oh, well, according to the National Enquirer, this thing is blah, 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 you would immediately dismiss it as insane. But if I cite a news channel, I get more credibility to that argument. By admitting you're not news, by admitting you're not a real journalist, you lose your power.
But both still retain some bias.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's bias all over the place, right? But it's, are you actually working to fight that bias? Or are you leaning into it? Tucker Carlson makes no effort whatsoever to fight his biases. He leans into it and then says he's a journalist. On the air. In a courtroom, he says he's not. It's exactly what Greg Chambers does it today in the port. When he wants to be taken seriously, he calls himself a journalist. When he gets called out on bullshit, he says, I'm not a journalist. You can't have it both ways. You are or you aren't. Either you're aiming for objectivity or you're not. Another critical principle is something that we call fourth estate responsibilities. And this really ties in strongly with the idea of objectivity and why you should aim for objectivity. It requires a little bit of a history lesson, so sorry about that. Shortly after the American Revolution, our French colleagues who had helped us fight our revolution went home and went, you know what, that was fun, let's do it again. And they started their own revolution. They started their own French revolution.
You're talking about the XYZ affair, or? No, you aren't.
No, I'm just talking about the French Revolution in general, like that, the overthrowing of the aristocracy.
Marie Antoinette.
Yep, Marie Antoinette, Robespierre, all of them, right? During the French Revolution, it was said that there were 3 estates, right? Estates, in this instance, meaning like...
Lords, commoners.
There were lords, there were commoners, and then what was the third?
Cleric.
The clergy. The clergy. You had the church, you had the nobility, and you had the common folk. The idea being that those are the 3 seats of power, right? Those are the 3 groups you have to interact with, to deal with, to get power and hold power. Well, during the French Revolution, it was argued that the press became the 4th estate, because now they were holding all of the others accountable as well. And again, think back to that timeline we went through a long time ago now in the publishing world. Paper was widely available. Printing presses were widely available. It was easy to distribute news to a large audience. It was easy to get information out to a large, diverse audience. Now the press matters, right? So during the French Revolution, the idea of the 4th estate is developed, right? That term 4th estate is coined. The idea is that the press holds people in power accountable. The press speaks truth to power. They're the ones who make sure that the other 3 estates don't get away with anything. They make sure that the church doesn't get away with anything that the royals and the commoners won't know about. They make sure the commoners won't get away with anything that the clergy and the nobility won't find out about. They find out that the nobility won't be able to do anything without the commoners and the clergy finding out. The press is the equalizer. They serve none of those houses. They let everybody else know what's going on with the other groups. That's what the idea of 4th estate responsibilities are, is that the press has a responsibility in a civil society to speak truth to power, to hold power accountable. That's the problem these days, is the press has given that up. Right? By and large, the press has given up their 4th estate responsibilities. They're not as concerned about holding people in power accountable as they are accessing people in power. In the golden days of journalism, you had these real, just ball-buster journalists who you weren't going to get away with anything. You had your Edward R. Murrows, you had your Walter Cronkites, you had your Tim Russert team, who they were going to hold you accountable for what you said. They were going to push the question. Today, the threat is, oh, well, if you ask me questions that I don't like, I'll just never talk to your network again. So the press has been neutered. They don't ask difficult questions of politicians. They don't ask difficult questions of people in power, because then they lose access to those people in power. Why didn't they figure that out before? Why is it in the 50s they didn't just cut off the press? Why didn't Nixon, right, during Watergate, why didn't he just cut off the press and say, we're not doing any interviews, we're not talking to anybody? Well, because how else was their message going to get out? Prior to the globalization of media, prior to the convergence of media, the press was necessary to get your message out. If the press wasn't covering you, it's not like we could go to your website. It's not like we could go to your Twitter feed. If what you did wasn't in the newspaper, we wouldn't know what you were doing, positive or negative. The press was necessary before. Now, the White House doesn't ever have to give an interview to a press affiliate. They can get all their messaging out without ever interacting with the press. So now it's a threat. Now it's a threat to say, okay, well, we don't like you, we're not going to talk to you anymore. So they've given up that ability to push because they want access. Okay? This is why people get so upset as well about the idea of the press being shitty or the press being biased. Is because they're supposed to be there for us. A shift occurred a few years ago, right, within our lifetimes, where journalism went from an independent venture based on the idea of accountability to a profit-generating venture just like any other business. One of the cases you can look at for the legal analysis paper you have to do at the end of the semester is a case that involves a television affiliate in Florida that fired 2 reporters because those reporters refused to do a story about one of the sponsors of that television station in a positive light. Basically, the gist is these reporters found out that one of these local companies was shady as hell, were doing all kinds of bad things. They wanted to run a report about it. Their bosses told them, no, you can't do that. You have to do a story that paints them in a positive light. These journalists said, no, that goes against our ethics. It violates the ethics of our profession to lie. So they got fired. These journalists got fired for not lying. So they sued and said, you can't fire me for not lying. I'm a journalist. It went to federal court. It worked its way up to federal court. And the federal court ruled that journalists have no obligation to tell the truth. Legally speaking, journalists have no obligation to tell the truth. What the fuck are we doing? What are we even doing then? Like, that's case law. That's established case law in this country right now. Is that journalists are not required to tell the truth. You can lie as much as you want. How far we've come, right? How far we've come, right? Where at one point in time, the press was there to be our protector, to be the common person's ally, to make sure that nothing happened in the darkness, right? It's like the New York Times, tagline is "Truth dies in the dark." So long as we're, aware of what's going on around us, shady shit can't go on. Right? That was the premise. Now, they're not required to tell the truth. They have no leverage to tell people in power you have to talk to us. It's a great ideal, and we still believe in that ideal as a citizenry, but we don't have any way to actually live it. It's a great idea that we can't actually execute. And it creates a lot of dissonance, creates a lot of consternation. Another key principle is the separation of what we call business and editorial operations. Separation of business and editorial operations. Editorial operations, I realize that in common parlance, the term editorial usually refers to opinion. When people hear editorial, they think like, oh, it's an opinion. In the industry, editorial means news gathering, right? So like anything that goes into the news gathering side. Business operations are the advertising side, the human resources side, what keeps the lights on. Okay. In pre-Rona times, I would take my classes to do tours of television stations in Rockford, right? And there's a very clear, literal physical separation in all of those buildings between the business side of the operation and the editorial side of the operation. The news gatherers, the journalists, the editors do not have any interaction whatsoever with the people who are selling ads, with the people who are writing the checks, with the people who are overseeing operations of the building. They're completely separate entities, physically and philosophically. Because to have a fourth estate, to have a press that defends the people, that speaks truth to power, they can't be concerned with the finances. Because the finances can oftentimes interfere with the truth. The example I just gave of the reporters in Florida. They were told not to do a story because the station's income would have been affected by it. Editorial and business should remain separate.
So,
yeah.
How do they, how exactly does each group get their money? Is it like the profits of the paper are split between the two, or what?
It all goes into the pool, right? It all goes into the pool. Think of it like a family income, right? Like a household income, right? I bring in the money into my household, and some of that money goes to ComEd, and some of that money goes to NICOR, and some of that money goes to Charter. Charter and NICOR aren't engaged with each other at all, right? They're separate out expenses, but they're coming from the same income, right? Coming from the same revenue stream, but going out in different channels. It's kind of like that in a news organization. Advertising is what brings in all the money, right? That's how everything is paid for, is from the advertising. Advertising brings in the money. The only cost in advertising is the salaries of your salespeople, right? But there's costs in the salaries of your news people, costs in subscription to wire services, costs in equipment, right? So advertising is bringing in all the money, even though that money is going to all of these other places that don't bring in any money. My money goes to my kids. They don't make shit, right? They don't bring in any revenue to our household, but they sure as shit spend it. Right? There's plenty of output, but no input. That's kind of how advertising works in news, right? So yeah, they're bringing in the money, but they shouldn't have influence over what stories are run because they have different responsibilities. The business side, their responsibilities are to keep the lights on, to bring money in, to make sure that people can do what they need to do. The journalists, the editorial side, their responsibility is to tell the fucking truth. Their responsibility is to tell people what's going on in the world that they need to know about, right? Great example, right? Simple example. Several years ago, NBC News was owned by General Electric, right? Now they're owned by Comcast. But they were owned by General Electric, the people who make ovens and light bulbs, right? They own NBC News. There was a massive recall announced on GE products because they were literally...
And they were the only station that chose not to run the store.
NBC was the only one that didn't cover it. These products were catching fire in people's homes. Like, people's lives were in danger. But NBC News decided that they didn't want their stock price dropping by covering it. CBS covered it, ABC covered it, Fox covered it. But NBC wouldn't cover it. That was where business interfered with editorial. Adam, you asked me the other day, what's a good news station, right? Who's figured it out? And I told you that's one of my controversial opinions is until we remove the profitization, the profit motive of journalism, you're going to have really shitty journalism. There's a really good movie called Good Night and Good Luck. George Clooney directed it and is in it. But it's about Edward R. Murrow, fighting with Joseph McCarthy, right, in the Red Scare. And there's a great moment in the film where Edward R. Murrow's character, Edward R. Murrow was talking to the head of CBS, and he's talking about, the head of CBS is talking about how, you're losing us money. By doing this, you're costing the station money. And Edward R. Murrow says, so fucking what? Right? I'm grossly paraphrasing here. Because there was a time where that was the expectation. Journalism isn't supposed to make money. You're not supposed to make money off of telling people the truth because people don't like the truth. You make money off of your other ventures that pays for that. Right? Again, comparing it to a household. Right? I like playing video games. I don't make any money off playing video games. Nor should I. It's what I do to take care of myself. So I do other things to afford the ability to take care of myself. Journalists shouldn't have to make money, make profit off of their work. That's not what they're there for. And that's why you used to have companies that, again, CBS and NBC, ABC, they were independent, they had their entertainment programming to pay for their journalism. NBC would put on these, fluffy talk shows and these game shows and these sitcoms because that's what generated all of the revenue for the station. That's what allowed them to pay the reporters to do their job. The model has shifted so that now it's not these shows pay for the network, it's these shows pay for these shows. Friends pays for Friends. Friends doesn't pay for NBC Nightly News. Whereas that used to be the model. It all went into the pot of the network. And you could have these non-profit generating ventures. Now, news has to generate profit for itself. We're not going to take from this pot over here, you have to have your own. It's the equivalent of me telling my 8-year-old child, no, you have to pay your own rent. You have to pay your own bills. It's absurd, but that's the model we've moved to. And it creates more and more of these conflicts of, are we able to uphold that separation of editorial and business? And of course, there's the principle of balance. What do you think balance in journalism should mean? What should we aim for in terms of balance? What do you think?
I think like a good line of personal taste and keeping to the objectivity of the story.
I don't really have a thought about it. I'd just say it's like trying to keep a balance between like telling the truth and not over-telling the truth.
Okay. Typically speaking, when we're talking about balance, we're talking about unsettled controversies, right? There are some things that are unsettled controversies. We don't know the truth. So there's opposing ideas, there's opposing beliefs, there's opposing values there. The principle of balance is that you should give equal fairness to those conflicting views of the world. You shouldn't only give one side of the story.
So it's a balance of perspectives.
Yeah, exactly. Balance of perspective. That's a good way of putting it, right? And of course, that's a noble value to uphold in journalism. That's important, right? Because again, if the role of journalism, if the role of news media is to explain the world to us, to help us understand the world in an objective way, then journalists themselves can't make that determination about what is the right way to see it. They have to let us make that judgment about the right way to see it. And that's the concept of balance. However, that, like the rest, can go way off the fucking rails, right? If I'm a journalist, if I'm writing a story for Highland News Now, and there's a controversy on campus where Adam says 1 + 1 = 2, and Lindsay says 1 + 1 = tomato, do I have an ethical obligation to give Lindsay as much coverage as I give Adam?
Yeah.
No. Fuck no. Why not?
Because my opinion is wrong.
Because you're clearly wrong. Because you're insane. Balance doesn't mean you give the crazy people the same amount of coverage and the same amount of credibility as the sane people. It's one of the jokes you see on social media all the time now, right? On one hand, you have all of these doctors, right, who spend their lives studying the subject matter, and then, for a counterpoint, here's a guy who watched a YouTube video yesterday. They're not fucking equal. And we need to stop pretending like all things need two sides. There are unsettled controversies, and then there's insanity, right? It is simply not unsettled to say, is the coronavirus real? It's fucking settled. Do vaccinations cause autism? No. Period. Why do we have people from the other side? The other side are crazy. The other side are saying things that are provably false. Why do I have to give time and energy to people who are saying something that is false? That's fucking insane. For that matter, if I'm covering an event, right, like let's say, I'm a reporter for Highland News Now, Highland's television show, Highland's news show. And I go to the Board of Trustees meeting, which happens once a month. And at that Board of Trustees meeting, the president of the college says something that I can prove to be false. The president of the college says something that I can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt is untrue. As a journalist, is my responsibility to simply say what she said, to report it straight? Or is my responsibility to say, this is what the president said, but here's why that's not true? Is my responsibility simply to be a mirror, be a reflector of what was said? Or is my responsibility to the truth? If the president of the college gets up in an address and says, oh yeah, enrollment is up 300%, we have a budget surplus, and and our teams are undefeated in all sports for the year, don't I have an obligation to say that's not true? Or do I have a debate on television of whether or not it's true? It's provably fucking untrue. There's this bizarre fear in news media today that if you don't present both sides of an issue, regardless of how absurd it is, then people are going to attack you for not being fair. Why not have loyalty to the truth rather than loyalty to fear? Why not have some fucking balls as a news organization to say, yeah, you're right, we didn't give equal time to a flat earther. You know why? They're fucking crazy. Because your crazy uncle who's forwarding conspiracy theories to you every other day isn't just as relevant as experts in the field. That's why. Not all issues need a both sides. Because sometimes the other side is just flat out fucking wrong. And I don't think the press has any obligation to pretend otherwise. Do people get really mad when they do that? Yes, they do. Good. Let them get mad. But because there's now a financial motivation behind the journalism, they have to worry about that. Edward R. Murrow didn't worry if people were mad at him. He didn't worry if people were upset with the way he covered it. Because his bosses had his back. Because they knew that he wasn't there to make money. Now, you need to appeal to the craziest people because you're afraid you're going to lose money. You get rid of sensationalism, you get rid of shitty journalism, you get rid of being rolled over all the time, you get rid of all these problems you find in media when you disincentivize profit. When you no longer make profit the driving force behind that train. That's how you fix American journalism. But to deprofitize journalism, you either need to, one, be nonprofit organizations like charities, relying entirely on donations from average people, or B, you need to be state sanctioned. You need to be a PBS, where every year the government says, this is your budget. There you go.
But when like the donation part, just like the viewers who donate, wouldn't they just have like views that they want the news to show?
Yes, absolutely. So we're left with one option. State-funded journalism. Which sounds terrifying. I get that sounds terrifying. Because that's what Russia does. Right? You know, that's what communist countries do. But you don't make that flexible. What communist countries do, what totalitarian regimes do, is they have state-controlled media. Meaning that they have to approve the journalism that goes on. They're in control.
Rather than a government-sponsored medium?
PBS model, right? No one from the government can come into the headquarters of PBS and say, don't run that story. The only concern PBS has is if Congress were to cut their funding, right? It takes an act of Congress to cut their funding. And there have been a couple times where that's been a concern, right? So you make it not cuttable. All right, Congress can no longer cut their funding, or you raise the bar for their funding. Rather than a simple majority, it has to be a 2/3 majority to cut their funding. They have the safety and security of knowing that we're going to have this money, we're going to be able to do our jobs, whether it pisses you off or not. There are drawbacks to that, because they could just theoretically go, oh, hey, fuck it, we'll do what we want, and that's nothing. Right? There's that threat that they could just take the money and run. Okay, well then you got that 2/3 check in there. You can say, okay, well they're obviously doing nothing, so if it's egregious enough, you'll have a 2/3 majority to vote on it. But right now, PBS and NPR are political football. Right? Where almost every year there's a threat to cut funding in PBR and NPS and yes, and NPR, not the beer, not PBR. There's a threat to cut PBS and NPR funding. There's a threat to cut arts funding. Right? Every year, people want to make this an issue. Because that's the only, because PBR, goddamn, PBS and NPR are holding people accountable, and they don't like that. So, these principles are great goals. Are they realistic goals? And that's what bothers me the most, is that this is what we absolutely should be fucking doing in journalism. But the real world interferes. You know, great on paper, hard to live. Thoughts, questions, comments? Expletives?
No.
Really sick of this mask shit. All right.